Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Jazakumullah khairan everyone for coming last minute. I know we had a bit of a change, and I did send out a very, very last minute email on the recommendation of Brother Javed, but I don't know if anyone checked the email that last second. Yeah, so, but Alhamdulillah is good. Inshallah, with a little bit of difficulty, there's more reward. Inshallah. But I mean, it is a positive. Alhamdulillah, we have accommodation to switch to Plan B, and this is something we should be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. So today, inshallah, will be session three. I did at the very end of last class, there was a couple of points I just wanted to kind of discuss more as opposed to just giving rulings because some of these things are modern issues. For example, the asthma inhaler is a modern issue. Um, Injections, by and large, are a form of modern issue, right? So what we talked about last week were the classical principles the scholars had in mind, right? And just to review that classic principle, I think this. Can you go to yeah, zoom a little bit. Full page for this. Yeah, to be very easy. Yeah, that should be good. Yeah, yeah. Also, I'd go a little bit more. Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah. So this paragraph kind of summarizes the principles that the fast is only invalidated if a substance enters from an entry point. We mentioned the entry point is the mouth and the nose, right? Generally speaking, that is connected with the digestive system. The digestive system, for our purposes, is the throat, the stomach, and the intestines. So you have entry point, which is mouth and nose. You have your throat, stomach, and intestines, and it stays there independently, if you remember, not something that is attached from the outside, right? Without the presence of an excuse. An excuse is like, you forgot that you're fasting and you eat something in the morning, or you're walking down the street and I don't know, a lot of smog and you breathe in a lot of smoke, direct smoke. For example, these are things that are out of your control, or you're doing wudu, for example, you have extra water in your mouth. These are things that there's nothing you can do about. So this is the general principles that we have, right? Based on these principles, this is a chart that I showed. Now, this chart goes 100% just based on the principles, okay? So acupuncture, for example, would not, and there's a reason why. So most of these I mentioned last week, there were just a couple that needed a little bit of uh, discussion. And first was with asthma inhalers. According to this, according to this, it says yes, it breaks the fast. Why? Because if you strictly look at the principles, you have a substance going inside the nose into the throat and onwards. So based on those principles, it'll break the fast. So the scholars or modern scholars, when it comes to asthma inhalers, are of two opinions. And I don't think I'm in a position to say which one is more correct or not. I'll just mention both of them, and you can feel comfortable with whichever one of these opinions you feel comfortable with. The first opinion is what's up on the screen, that yes, it does break the fast. Why do they say that? Because they're strictly going by the classical principles. And they say if we're going to stick to our principles, the asthma inhaler should break the fast. But then the question arises, what happens to a person that actually needs to puff, right, multiple times a day? And this is not something that person will recover from. It's something chronic. Well, then the scholars say the discussion goes back to what we talked about last week: illnesses, chronic illnesses. If a person has a certain chronic illness that requires him or her to take medication time after time, then they don't have to fast. They can give fidya. So they say that this person, if he or she has to consistently puff throughout the day during the fast, and this is something chronic, then they qualify for the fidya, meaning they wouldn't have to fast, they would give fidya. So that's one opinion, and this is what's up on the screen. The second opinion is that they say, yes, by principle it breaks the fast, but they make an exception because of the medical necessity and the fact that you're constantly doing it. And it's not really nutrition per se, right? It's more, I don't know the medical term for it, but it's something that you need, right? So it's not really serving a nutritious perspective or nutrition perspective. It's more of a medical necessity. And if we're going to go down that route, then you can open the door for a lot of people not to fast. So based on that, a lot of the fiqh councils of North America, I think AMJA, the American Muslim Jurist Association, their fatwa on their site, I believe, is that it does not break the fast, looking at it strictly from the medical necessity perspective. And they said if you open that door, then it's gonna basically a lot of people won't fast and they'll just give fidya. And they say that's not the purpose that the Sharia came down with. So one group of scholars, they're sticking with like principles, and the others say it's an exception to the rule. Inshallah, whichever one you feel comfortable with, that's something that you can take. Inshallah, scholars are on both sides, and that will also apply for the other question that the sister also mentioned about the same, yeah, same thing. Inshallah.
So adherence does not go into your digestive tract. Most of it
Yeah.
goes into your lung.
Yeah,
So,
but it does go through the throat, right?
it does.
It does, right?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Based strictly on principle, based strictly on principle, the fact that it hits the throat, the principle is that throat, stomach, intestines, right? Any one of these areas. So they're looking at a very, I would say, a literalist almost point of view. You know how you have constitutional interpretation, literalist versus the meaning behind it. So those group of scholars, they're almost literalist from the way that this is the principles, it breaks it, right? And they say if it's a chronic illness, they should just give fidya. They're exempt from fasting. The other group of scholars, they say, no, we have to kind of look at the spirit behind the principles. It's not, we can't be so literal, especially in a situation like asthma inhalers. So that's why they give leeway. And that is a position of or fatwa given by Amja. I also believe the Fiqh Council of North America also gives that same fatwa as well. They're looking more at the spirit, the meaning behind it, and the same thing would apply in that situation mentioned as well. Yeah.
So I have almost a hypothetical question,
Okay.
which is that, so from last week, and I think it's repeated, when you mentioned that the three um, points are the throat,
Yeah.
the mouth,
The throat,
So-
stomach, and intestines,
yeah,
and entering to the mouth and nose.
mouth and nose.
Yeah.
Okay. But ultimately, one would think that the reasoning for that in the context of fasting is what you just said, something that provides nutrition, either it helps you with hunger or thirst,
Yeah.
right? And so one can easily imagine that, the time that these principles were developed, that made complete sense. These were the routes through which you could take in nutrition.
Yeah.
Now, if we use that criteria strictly, the literalist, and I'm thinking of the asthma, let's flip it on the side. And someone is being fed through their veins, for example.
We're about to just talk about that right now.
So you're not going to violate those principles, but clearly you're providing nutrition.
No, so all right, you just bring us up to our second point of discussion, which is injections in general, whether intramuscular, intravenous, whatever the case may be. You do have two groups of scholars at this point as well. So based on this, again, you have to give credit where credit is due. They're sticking by principles, and according to the principles, whether it's intramuscular or intravenous, it doesn't matter. Whether it's nutritious or not, according to these principles, it's not going through the mouth, the nose, and it's not going directly into the throat, stomach, and so on and so forth. It's in the muscles or in the uh, blood tract, right? So that would not break the fast, no matter what sort of injection it may be. However, that's the strict. Then you do have a group of scholars that now divulge from these principles, and they say, no, 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 we have to, in this particular case, because this wasn't there at that time, like you mentioned. So now they're looking at the spirit behind it, and they're saying, okay, now we have to kind of divide injections into two types, right? Into nutritional versus non-nutritional. If it's non-nutritional, then it won't break the fast. If it's nutritional, then it breaks the fast. So that's a group of scholars. So it's very hard to determine what is like I'm not in a position to come and say right or wrong, right? It's something to consider and think about. The point I think of this workshop is that without a doubt, you're going to come across fatwa, right? I mean, everybody does some research. The point is to try and understand where they're coming from. And at least when you take a position, you have an understanding of what the thought process is. It's very principle based, or the other scholars are also principle based, but sometimes they'll divulge based on the spirit behind the concept of fasting.
Yeah, sorry, so I did not take too much time with it. What I was also trying to get is a bigger question. So this is about fasting, but clearly in other issues, when you have classical interpretations, right, which were taken with available knowledge. Now, let's say the knowledge has changed. How in sort of ijtihad is that kind of taken into account? I mean, we don't have to get this into this right now, but
Yeah. So that's a much
yeah,
deeper sort of conversation.
yeah,
But there is, I mean, the discussions are ongoing. That's why you have fit councils, right? Whether on a global level, I mentioned in the fit class, you have the fit council, the Muslim World League, and they call it Arabic Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami, and these groups of scholars they
it's an
meet
ongoing.
together. Yeah. So this is something as an ongoing discussion. What can be looked at versus what is set in stone. So this is something that scholars are constantly looking at and revising and so on and so forth, right? And most of this stuff you'll see in modern issues, right? And you see this is a beautiful example, actually, the injections and
Yeah,
asthma inhaler
yeah,
of the strict principle look versus the more spirit behind type of look. Again, inshallah, both of these opinions with asthma and injections injection, I just want to clarify again, you have one group of scholars, as you see up on the screen, they say it doesn't matter what sort of injection, it won't break the fast because the principles that we've taken, it doesn't violate any of them, right? And another group of scholars, they'll say, no, we have to look at the spirit. If it provides nutrition, then it kind of serves that same purpose. So it should break the fast, but if it's non-nutritional, it doesn't break the. But we'll take two questions, one there and one there, then we'll have to move
I
on.
think most
Yeah.
of the inhalers are twice a day or something like that,
Yeah.
right? So if the intended person just takes the inhalers that we call the controllers in the
Yeah.
morning and the evening after the break of fast, that'll be fine, right? But there's sometimes they need a rescue in case if
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
airway closes and something like that, and that can be like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So
Yes, that's something to also consider. So at the end of the day, I think every person should get medical consultation first, and then they should like speak to an imam or something, and then try to bring two together because sometimes you can't give blanket statements, right? But I think I spoke to a sister here. She's not here today. Last week, she actually mentioned the same thing. She actually does take inhalers, and she mentions that she can, if she wants to, take it before fasting, depending on the time of the year, and also after fasting, it wouldn't be an issue. So it really depends person to person. Again, we're just focusing on kind of the thought process behind it. But if you do know someone that is doing that, they should get medical consultation first and then like speak to an imam and provide that information. And then you can come up with a fatwa for lack of better.
So it's the intention is anything to do with it. The rapid people who are taking inhaler, they're not intending to have nutrition. So it's going in the throat.
Yeah, so I mean that's why you have some people that say that it won't break the fast, right? Based on that, right? Yeah,
Just the thought that, people who get intravenous nutrition
yeah.
are sick to the point where they
Yeah.
can't fast.
Yeah, so that's another very good point. Yeah, that's another very good point. Yeah, so the fasting probably wouldn't even be obligatory in the first place, based on the whole fidya concept. Okay, so that was pretty much wrapping up last week. So most of the fasting, breaking fast, there's other things over here. If we just want to just quickly conclude, if you have other questions, you have, we'll just go one by one. You have acupuncture, asthma pump, we talked about it. Contact lenses, no. Creams, lotions would not break the fast. Deodorant would not break the fast. Eardrops would not break the fast. Endoscopy, I think because of the solution sprayed in the throat, I believe it can break the fast. Extracting blood, if you give blood, it won't break the fast. However, you should keep in mind if that weakens you, because like I know I have issues when I give blood, I passed out, right? So if it weakens you, then perhaps do not give it in Ramadan. But it in itself does not break fast. But again, if it does weaken you, then maybe you should avoid that. Um, Eye drops does not break the fast. Injections, we talked about that. IV drips, I think they're similar to injections. Lighting incense, it's fine. You could do that in your house. Lip balm, no. Makeup, no. Lipstick, no. Unless you're unless you're eating it. Yeah. No, it would not. So lip balm, lipstick, similar. Uh, uh, Mouthwash. So mouthwash depends, right? If you obviously if you swallow it, it does. If you don't swallow it, it's fine. Nose spray is similar to, I think we could put nose spray in the same category as asthma inhaler that we talked about. Patches, no. Pills and tablets, the scholars say it does. Smelling food, it does not. Smelling perfume, it does not. Smoking, it does. Suppository, yes. Toothpaste, it depends. Again, if you swallow it, if you don't swallow it, it's fine. In vaginal examinations, it does not, right? Um, yeah, these are some of the things. Another thing someone asked me was a dental exam, for example. Dental exam, in theory, it would not, in theory. But obviously, if there's things being swallowed, it would. So take your precautions, right? Take your precautions. If you can reschedule it, maybe a bit better to reschedule it outside of uh, Ramadan. The other thing that I mentioned, just wrapping up with a couple of points we talked about last week, the concept of giving fidya, right? And we mentioned that in theory, you can give fidya towards the end of the month or middle of the month or beginning of the month, especially if you know if an elder person or sick person knows they're not going to fast. If you know you're not going to fast, or a person that you know in your family is not going to fast, it's always better, especially if you're giving fidya overseas, right? To give it before. Why? Because, and this is a mistake that a lot of people do with sadaqatul fitr as well, the fitr at the end. They think that, oh, I could come right before Eid and put it in the box and whatever, and it's done. Well, that the poor person is not going to receive that until much later, because obviously it has to go through a process where the person will receive it. So especially if you know someone personally you're going to give it to, okay, then that's a different story. But if you're going to be giving that overseas or giving it to an organization that will give it on your behalf, I would say the earlier you give it is better, especially in the beginning of Ramadan, especially if you know that you're not going to fast because of your condition. Because again, the point is that you want the poor people, and this is the wisdom of the Sharia, where they want the poor to also be able to enjoy parts of Ramadan and Eid as well. So that's something to keep in mind. So if anyone is not fasting and they're giving fidyas, then please keep that in mind and trying to give that earlier. Yeah.
So the person who is not going to fast is the one who has to pay the fidya, or can somebody pay it on their behalf?
Either way, either way is fine. Yeah. So let's just say I have a grandmother that's sick, right? Either it could come from her money or anybody from the family can give it on her behalf too. Either way is perfectly fine. And that's a general principle when it comes to monetary worship. Hajj, for example, is monetary, right? I could go with my own wealth, or somebody gives me $10,000 to go, then that's or more, then that's on you, right? Same thing with almost any other monetary worship. It's either from your wealth or you can allow someone to do it on your behalf as well. It's fine. All right, inshallah.
One final question.
Yeah.
What about injury? If somebody's in an accident, say, and they break a limb and they bleed, does that break their fast?
No, does not break the fast. Yeah. Um, and yeah, one other point I want to mention is that the concept of kafara. Kafara. I don't know if anyone heard of this concept. That's when it's mentioned that you free a slave. If you can't free a slave, then you fast for 2 straight months. If you can't fast for 2 straight months, then you feed 60 people. This is for the case of a person that, according to some of the scholars, when a person breaks their fast on purpose, right? Not by accident. So accidental, there is no kafara for accidental breaking fast or medically breaking your fast. There is no kafara for that. And this is based on a hadith where a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said that I have been destroyed. So the messenger said, what happened to you? And he said, basically, I had relations with my wife while I was fasting. So the Prophet ﷺ told him to free a slave. And he said, I can't do that. And he said to fast 60 days. And he said, I can't. Basically, he's not physically able to fast 60 consecutive days. And the Prophet told him, okay, feed 60 poor people. And he said, I can't do that either. He doesn't have money. So the Prophet gave him some dates and he said, at least, take care of your family. Basically, he was in the situation where he had no other option. Generally speaking, if a person breaks their fast on purpose, meaning they started fasting and then they broke it, the freeing of slave is out, right? So a person would have to fast for 60 consecutive days with no pauses in between. The only exception is menstruation or sickness, right? So if it's a man, for example, he has to figure out a time where he has to fast 60 straight days without break. If he's physically unable to do that, then he would then move to feeding 60 poor people. But that's contingent on the fact that he's physically unable to fast for 60 straight days. If he is able to fast for 60 straight days, he cannot go to feeding 60 poor people. This comes first. Again, this is only in the case of a person that breaks fast on purpose, right? With the relationship or so on purpose, right? Accidental and medical cases, kafara does not apply. Only fidya applies. Fidya we mentioned last week, right? Like I think the Fiqh Council mentioned at $15, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Last thing, I'm remembering a lot of these points. Another point was about the $15 concept. A lot of people are like, oh, where did $15 come from, right? $15 is the average it takes to generally feed a person 2 meals, right? That it takes to feed a person 2 meals on average nationwide, right? Obviously, if you're looking at Wisconsin versus New York City versus Los Angeles, it's going to differ. But for Council North America on a nation scale, they judge on average is $15, right? So the fidya can be given as $15, inshallah, and that's better to be on that side. Okay, now moving on to this week's. This week we're going to talk about a few miscellaneous issues. Suhoor, the Taraweeh prayer, and I'll attach to the Taraweeh prayer a little bit of the Witr prayer. So, okay, I made a mistake over here. It's supposed to say Suhoor on the top as a title. Eating Suhoor is a recommendation. And the reason why I put that there is that some people may think that eating suhoor is mandatory to fast. It's not mandatory, meaning that if you oversleep and you pass suhoor and you wake up at Fajr time, you can still fast. Because remember, we mentioned that as long as you have intention and you fast from Fajr to sunset, your fast is valid, right? And in most cases, a Muslim knows that they're fasting the next day. So if you oversleep for whatever reason and you know that you're going to fast and you miss suhoor, right, you can still fast. There is no issue with that. However, suhoor is highly, highly recommended. The Prophet ﷺ, as per the hadith, he said that eat suhoor, for in suhoor there is blessing. In suhoor there is barakah. Even if you eat like a date or drink water, anything, right? Sometimes a person can feel very, very tired, not have the energy. Just try and remember the command of the Prophet ﷺ. He said there's some barakah in it. So inshallah, there's barakah. Just have that intention to follow in the way of the Prophet and eat anything, eat something light. We have the opposite extreme as well, where people eat a lot during suhoor, and that's not good either because subhanallah, that really bothers you too, right? So just be moderate. A piece of advice actually that some of the scholars they said it's better to eat throughout, right? And maybe medically it could be better for you as opposed to eating everything at one shot. So what we tend to do, we tend to eat a lot at iftar time and a lot at suhoor time, and that's really not optimal. It's not optimal for you, right? Eat periodically, eat a little bit at iftar time, eat a little bit after iftar, eat a little bit after tarawih, and stay hydrated throughout, right? So inshallah, we want to be balanced. We don't want to be so extreme that we're eating so much as suhoor, or you're on the other side where you just skip suhoor totally. No, there's barakah in it, and whatever you wish to eat, inshallah, there's blessing in it. So that's suhoor. The other thing is delaying suhoor and hastening to eat the iftar is recommended. And this goes back to the question one of the brothers asked about imsak, the concept of imsak. The concept of imsak actually does not exist. There is no concept of imsak. I know some calendars or you might see somewhere they put like fajr at, I don't know, 5 o'clock and imsak or stop eating at 4:50, 4:45. In reality, that concept does not exist. I guess the thought process, if I want to, kind of lean into that thinking, they probably did it just so people are on the safe side, I guess. But in reality, you have until Fajr time to eat. And in many places, in fact, in many Muslim countries, I'm sure you've seen, people eat up until they hear the adhan, right? That's what we did in Saudi Arabia, I'm sure in other countries as well. As long as you know, okay, adhan's gonna be at 4 o'clock, 3:58, you just eat until 58, 59, you hear the adhan and you stop, right? And that's inshallah the natural way. And the beauty is that the Prophet ﷺ actually encouraged delaying the suhoor, meaning that let's just say Fajr is at 6 o'clock, that you don't eat at 3 o'clock and say, okay, I'm done. No, it's better to eat suhoor closer to the time of Fajr to the best of your ability. So you don't stop eating at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. No, if Fajr is at 6 o'clock, you can eat until 5, 10 minutes, whatever you're comfortable with too. Because sometimes you want to freshen up and so on and so forth. But you're allowed to eat up until Fajr time. Same thing with the iftar. It's recommended to hasten to eat the iftar quickly. So if Maghrib time comes in, you shouldn't wait 5 minutes, you shouldn't wait 10 minutes and have these waswasa thoughts that, okay, I'm not really sure, is it sunset? No, I mean, if it's Maghrib time is Maghrib time. You should break your fast. You shouldn't unnecessarily delay it. You shouldn't unnecessarily delay. The Prophet Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a hadith, "My nation, my ummah will continue in goodness so long as they hasten to break their fast and prolong the pre-fasting meal." Meaning they hasten to do the iftar and they prolong, meaning they delay the pre-fasting meal, which is the suhoor. What's the wisdom behind it? Perhaps is to remove this concept of fake piety, because some people might say, okay, I'm more pious. I'm going to eat suhoor way before the time. I'm more pious. I want to wait until Maghrib really gets in, then I'll eat. Is to remove that concept and put everyone together on the same boat, inshallah.
Question.
Yeah,
The question of suhoor,
yeah.
what's the definition? Is it that you have to sleep, wake up, or, you know, let's say, for example, the earlier example where someone is too tired and unintentionally overslept.
Yeah,
But let's say someone knows they're very tired and unlikely or may not be able to wake up, you know, around Fajr time.
Yeah.
To keep the sunnah,
yeah.
they could either, you know, midnight, one,
Yeah.
and say, okay, and the intention being this is my support.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, because again, suhoor is not mandatory and it's not restricted to a certain time. So if you know that your schedule makes it very difficult for you to wake up exactly at that time, you want to wake up a little closer to it, that's perfectly fine, right? There's no issue with that because it's not restricted that you have to eat at this time. Is these are all recommendations. So eating itself is a recommendation. Eating it closer to Fajr time is also a recommendation, but it is what it is, a recommendation. So if you have difficulty and other things and you eat it earlier, is perfectly fine, inshallah. But again, it's always better to follow in the way of the Prophet. Yeah. Now we have the night prayer, the concept of the night prayer. When we talk about the night prayer, three words come up a lot. Qiyamul Layl, Tahajjud, Tarawih. What is the difference between these three? Are they the same? Are they different? So Qiyamul Layl, the definition of it is that it's the recommended night prayer beginning after Isha until Fajr. It can also refer to spending the night in different forms of worship. That's why you'll have, the youth, they'd have Qiyam programs, right? It doesn't mean that they're praying Salah for like 4 hours straight, right? It's hoped that you're spending that time in doing as much as worship as possible, which is reciting Quran, listening to some good nasiha, good advice, and then performing some prayer as well. So Qiyamul Layl is a very broad definition. So most of the scholars say it refers to the recommended night prayer beginning after Isha until the time of Fajr throughout the year. So anytime you pray Salatul Isha and you want to pray extra prayers and you want to continue to pray extra prayers, that is called Qiyamul Layl. Tahajjud is a little more specific. Many of the scholars have said Tahajjud is the recommended night prayer that is done after waking from sleep. So let's just say you pray Salatul Isha, you go home, you go to sleep, and then you wake up half an hour before Fajr, you do wudu, and you pray again. That is what is called tahajjud. That is what is called tahajjud. So tahajjud is a form of Qiyamul Layl, because again, Qiyamul Layl is broad. It's any prayer that you do from Isha until Fajr. So tahajjud is a form of Qiyamul Layl. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Then you have Taraweeh. Taraweeh is even more specific. It's the highly recommended night prayer that is done specifically in Ramadan. That is specifically done in Ramadan. So you can say Tahajjud and Taraweeh are both forms of Qiyamul Layl, right? Tahajjud and Taraweeh are both forms of Qiyamul Layl. This Qiyamul Layl is broad. Any prayer throughout the year that you do from Salatul after Isha until Fajr time is Qiyamul Layl. It's a night prayer. Now, if you go to sleep and you wake up, this is the tahajjud prayer. And then you have Taraweeh, which is done specifically in the month of Ramadan. That's why in some countries, if you go, before they start the Taraweeh prayer, they'll make an announcement. They'll say Salatul Qiyam, right? They say Salatul Qiyam. It's general, like Taraweeh, Qiyam, it doesn't make a difference, right? They're just announcing that we're about to perform the night prayer. So whether they announce and say Salatul Qiyam, Salatul Taraweeh, it's the same thing. It's referring to the night prayer you're about to perform as well. Also, like recently, for example, this happens every year in the Haramain, right? They put up a schedule of who's leading the prayers and so on and so forth. If you look at the schedule, it says Taraweeh, then it says Tahajjud, right, for the last 10 nights, which means that Taraweeh is the first prayer after Isha, and Tahajjud is understood that there's a gap time between the Taraweeh and Tahajjud. People go take a nap or something, get some rest, they'll come back and perform the prayer. All of this is Qiyamul Layl. All of this is a form of Qiyamul Layl. Taraweeh, it's just scholars, they refer to it as the one in Ramadan. And the reason they say is because it's the word tarwiha. Tarwiha is like to rest. So say Taraweeh is like to rest multiple times. So when Taraweeh was initially done, the prayers used to be quite long. It used to go from Isha all the way up until almost Suhoor time. In fact, in the hadith where the Prophet prayed with the companions, one of the narration mentioned that the salah was so long, it was almost about to be Suhoor time. That's how long the prayer was, right? So to break it up and to make it easy, the as we'll mention later on, they kind of broke up the prayers, and the idea was to give people a little bit of rest, a little bit of relaxation. Obviously, we don't pray half as long, so we don't need as much as rest, but that's where the name Taraweeh comes from. So Taraweeh is like to rest. Taraweeh has like multiple points of rest, you can say, in the prayer. Yeah.
Susan, thank you for clarifying that because oftentimes there's a confusion between tahajjud and Qiyam.
Yeah.
And what you said is that tahajjud is recommended after sleeping and waking up.
Yeah.
And so for anyone, for whom tahajjud is a little bit difficult, if you're trying to aspire to that, there's also the sunnah of Rasulullah that before sleeping,
Yeah.
to do wudu and pray 2 rakat nafil. And that will actually come under your family.
Yeah, inshallah. I mean, we'll mention these everything more in the khatira. These are more like spiritual stuff. But in generally speaking, it's good to pray Qiyamul Layl. The best time is to perform it right before Fajr, for example, right? I'm talking about throughout the year. If you can't do that, then before going to sleep. So not right after Isha. But let's just say you pray Isha at 8 o'clock and you're going to sleep at 10. Then around 9:45, 9:50, you go to sleep, pray, and you go to sleep. And if you can't do that, then you pray after Isha. So there's multiple levels to it. But again, all of this is Qiyamul Layl. Taraweeh is specific to Ramadan. Origins of Taraweeh, we kind of mentioned this in the first week. I'm just re-mentioning it again. It's narrated in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim that Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayed in one night in the masjid, in Masjid Nabawi. Some people followed him in the prayer. Then the next night, more people came. Basically, what happened was he performed one night. Some people saw him, they joined him, and then they spread the word that, oh, I prayed with the Prophet. So the next night, more people came. The third night, even more people came. And then the fourth night, the Prophet ﷺ, is narrated that the masjid was packed and they're sitting, waiting, and he did not come out. And then he came out closer to the morning time and he said, I saw that you were gathered, but I didn't come out because I was afraid that if I did and continuously did this, it would become fard on you. So out of love for my ummah and out of care, I did not come out. And obviously this is the mercy of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now this practice continued where people would perform after the Isha prayer, their Taraweeh prayers. However, it became scattered. Some people would pray it in their homes, some people would pray in this corner of the masjid, some people in that corner, some people individually, some people in groups of 5, 10, 12. So during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, he felt that it was better to now gather the people together in one jama'ah in the masjid. What was his thought process? Well, number one, the fear of it become fard is now gone because the Prophet is not there anymore. Number two, this will be motivating for more people. And sometimes we know that as well. When the jama'ah is going on, it's a lot easier to pray together in congregation when you're around your fellow brothers and sisters than to be praying at home, right? So he felt that this would encourage more people to pray it. And lastly, to remove any sort of divisions amongst the people of the city. So he brought them together into one jama'ah. So now speaking about the Taraweeh prayer in particular, Taraweeh prayer is an emphasized sunnah, right? Which means that it's not mandatory. However, it's recommended, but it's emphasized. It's something that we should try our best to perform it to the best of our ability. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is narrated. He used to urge the performance of the prayer at night during the month of Ramadan, meaning the Taraweeh, without making it mandatory on them. Meaning he didn't say you have to do it, it's fard on you, but he encouraged it. He motivated people to come and pray that prayer. He said from his motivating words, whoever performs prayers at night during the month of Ramadan, man qama Ramadana imana wa ihtisaba, with iman, and ihtisab is like hoping in the reward of Allah, right? Will have his past sins forgiven. And this is a very powerful hadith. Two conditions though. One is iman that we all have, and secondly, with hope and reward. It shouldn't be a cultural thing that, oh, I just grew up praying Tarawih, so I want to pray Tarawih, or my family's praying it, so I'm praying it. No, you want to sincerely hope in the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inshallah, if you do this, He says that your sins will be forgiven. Right? So this in itself shows us how emphasized of a prayer it is. This same fadila of virtue is not there outside of Ramadan. Outside of Ramadan, again, it is encouraged to pray Qiyamul Layl, but is more emphasized in the month of Ramadan. Taraweeh prayer is optimally performed in congregation in the masjid. That is the optimal, way it's performed. However, it can be performed in congregation at home. If a family chooses to do so, it's not invalid, is valid, right? So the general idea is to come together in congregation, the jama'ah, but for whatever reason, if a person wishes to pray at home with their family, this is fine too. Likewise, it can be performed individually. It can be. So let's just say a person is feeling sick. They don't have the energy to go to a masjid, for example. You can still perform it at home. Or in some areas, a person may work night shifts, for example, and they're unable to perform it in jama'ah in the masjid. You can come home. You shouldn't think that, oh, khlas, my prayer is done. I'm unable to pray. No, you are able to still perform it at home. So optimally is done in the masjid in jama'ah. However, if a congregation takes place at home, that's fine as well. And if it's done individually, it's fine as well. It's not invalid. So all of these are valid. Optimal to do it together in the masjid, and that preserves the community as well. And there's some certain exceptions to the rule. They say if a person memorized the Quran and he wants to review his Quran, for example, he wants to pray at home. These are certain cases where perhaps it's good for him to perform it at home. But inshallah, all of these are fine. Now we have, no, this is a repetition. Yeah, that's a repetition. The famous question, the number of rak'at, the units of Taraweeh prayer. So the idea over here is that not to really go into rak'at, but to kind of give you the reasoning why some people do, or some people lean towards 8, some people lean towards 20, why. So if you look at the narrations, the number of rak'at reported varies from 8 all the way to 40. You have narrations of the Prophet praying less than 8, you have the Prophet praying 8, you have the Prophet praying 10, you have after him, you have 20 reported, you have 36, and you even have 40 up to 47, right? Which is narrated including witr. So there's a lot of variations here. The most common for our discussion, we'll just focus on two, 8 and 20, the most common one. What are the reasons behind it? Because it has been narrated, number one, that the general night prayer of the Prophet ﷺ was 8. This is a general night prayer of the Prophet ﷺ was 8 rak'at. However, it was also narrated that the Prophet ﷺ performed the night prayer as 10 as well. So you have 8, you have 10. And just so you know, it was also narrated he prayed less than that as well. Aisha says that when he became older, he used to pray 9, meaning he used to pray 6 and then 3, right? So generally, he used to perform 8. Then it's also narrated that he used to perform 10 as well. Then it was also narrated that during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, 8 rak'at was also done. Right? There's a narration. Then there are numerous narrations that during the time of Umar, 20 was established. Then you have numerous narrations that after the time of Umar, 20 rak'at remained and was done. And in some areas, even more than 20 was done. In Medina, in particular, is narrated that they performed 36, right? So you have this wide variation in narrations. You have the Prophet ﷺ praying 8, the Prophet praying 10. During the time of Umar, initially 8. Then during the time of Umar, is widely reported that it was 20. And then afterwards, it was also 20, which was inherited generation after generation. So how do we understand all of this, right? What many of the scholars have said is a way to understand this variation is this, that perhaps initially the Taraweeh prayer in itself was done as 8 with lengthy recitation and standing. We just mentioned that there's a narration that the companion said that one of the nights when they prayed with the Prophet, they started from after Aisha and they said we continued praying up until we were afraid that Suhoor time would end. That's how long the prayer was. So perhaps the understanding that many of the scholars have said that initially it was done in this fashion, less rak'at, more recitation, and used to take up a large portion of the night. Now, during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, the number of rak'at increased from 8 up until 20. Why? In order to make it easier on the people, lighter on the people. If you have more rak'at, the recitation in each rak'at is less, number one. Number two, you also have more breaks. You have more breaks. So this was done perhaps to make it easier on the people. So if people want to take a break after 4, they can take a break. Take a break after 6, they can take a break. They want to go home after 10, which is the practice that we see now, right? So the idea was that the number of rakat increased to make it easier on the people, less standing in the rakat, and more breaks in between, right? So keeping that in mind, in reality, the any argument that takes place in reality is, inshallah, there's no argument here, but it's a really useless argument because it has no actual benefit, right? Because all of these have been narrated on the Prophet and Umar and so on and so forth. The idea is that whatever is in your capacity, whatever you can possibly do, you just perform that prayer without unnecessarily getting into arguments because there is no scope for argument. If a person actually goes back and reads the works of the classical scholars, they mention this and they really open the door to flexibility. They say, some of the scholars say that a person could pray 40, 50, 60, 80, whatever he wants to pray, right? Whatever is in his capacity, right? Some people might prefer longer recitation and less rakat, and some people they like taking more breaks, right? So inshallah, whatever the masjid is performing is always good to just pray whatever the masjid is doing, right? If you go to a masjid and they're performing 8 or they're performing 10, you want to pray more, then feel free, go home and pray more. Who's stopping you? Right? And if the masjid is praying 20 and you follow the imam until 20, that's great. And if you want to go home earlier, you're not feeling well, or you just want to go home, it's your preference, then leave early. No one's stopping you as well. And we shouldn't have this feeling, oh, this guy's leaving early or this guy's staying later. I mean, this is all unnecessary, and this wasn't found in the earlier generations. One narration I did point out here is something we should really keep in mind. It's narrated the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man qama ma'al imami hatta yansarif." Whoever prays the prayer with the imam until he finishes, meaning he starts the prayer from beginning to end, whatever the amount it is, then he will get كُتِبَ لَهُ أَجْرُ قِيَامِ لَيْلَةٍ, that he gets the reward for performing the entire night. So if a person is able to pray with the imam, and obviously you have multiple imams and multiple imams, meaning you pray from beginning till end until the prayer is finished, then the follower gets the reward as if he has prayed the entire night. Now, who doesn't want to get the reward of praying the entire night, especially in the month of Ramadan, right? So that's something that we should keep in mind and we should strive for. Obviously, if case situations come up, people get tired, people have work, so on and so forth, you need to judge based on your own schedule. But just keep this narration in mind to try and motivate yourselves a little bit. Wherever you pray, however much you pray, try and finish the entire prayer with the Imam, inshallah.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
So outside of Ramadan, that this seems to be referring to the Fard Salah, which is done in the congregation.
Yeah.
Right. In Ramadan, obviously in Aisha, you have the Fard, but then you have the Tarawih.
Yeah.
So if one were to do the Fard in congregation,
Yeah.
right? But let's say for whatever reason, don't stay for the completion of the Tarawih. I would think that would still apply. I mean, they're present.
The Fajr, the Isha and Fajr prayer.
Yeah.
Inshallah, that would, yeah.
Yeah.
But this is obviously more because the thought process is obviously your prayer also has to be accepted too, right? You have to make sure you're concentrating, you're doing it's not like I'm just gonna come in clockwork, I'm just gonna stand here for 2 hours and khalas, I just got reward for the whole night. It doesn't work like that. You need, focus in your prayer to the best of your ability. So by doing both, let's just say you're giving yourself a better shot, let's just say, right? Inshallah. But if you're unable to, for whatever case, then inshallah, it could work as well, inshallah. Yeah.
One other quick question.
Yeah.
It occurred to me that, I mean, is there another salah outside of Tarawih with the Eid that's done in congregation?
There is a couple. We have something called Salatul Istisqa. If you've ever been, Saudi and stuff, they perform Salatul Istisqa. That's the salah for rain. For example, that's done in congregation. You have Salatul Kusuf and Khusuf, the solar eclipse and lunar eclipse prayers. So these are some of the other prayers that are also done in congregation. I think solar eclipse took place or can take place here, but Istisqa is done very commonly. And so actually, when I was in Umrah, they performed Salatul Istisqa. No, actually, no. A week before I went, they were doing Salatul Istisqa. So that's done pretty commonly. In fact, I even saw some massages in Texas. They performed it once when it wasn't raining for a while. So that's generally the rain prayer. So that's also done in congregation. Now we have the witr prayer. Now the witr prayer is the prayer done typically as the final prayer of the night. This prayer has an odd number of rak'at, most commonly performed as 3. Now, the description of how to pray the witr prayer are many, right? And this is the reason why I'm going into this is because there are a lot of different variations and description of how the Prophet ﷺ prayed with it. I'm just going to mention 2 common ones that we see in practice. One of them is to pray 3 rak'at together. In the final rak'ah, after reciting Surah Al-Fatiha and another surah, they do a takbir and make dua silently before going into ruku'. The rest of the prayer is then completed as usual. This is something we've seen, right? Then you have to pray 2 rak'at and do taslim. Afterwards, you add on a single rak'ah. After reciting Surah Al-Fatiha with another surah and going into ruku', stand up and make dua out loud if done in congregation. Then go into sajda and finish the prayer as usual. So I'm sure perhaps we've seen both of these done. And are there more? Yeah, there are more. Just letting you know, these are just 2 of the more common ones. The idea here is not to really go into the academic discussion per se, just to kind of give you the reason why scholars choose a certain position or why scholars they prefer a certain position or not. So what are the narrations for description number 1? The one that you pray 3 altogether and so on and so forth. One of the narrations comes from the famous hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha. She says that when describing the night prayer of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she said he used to offer 4 rak'at, and she said, "Do not ask me about their beauty and length," which means how long it was and how beautiful he used to perform it with his recitation. So she said he used to offer 4, then he used to offer 4. Again, don't ask me about the beauty and length, and then 3. Right. So if you're going to do 4, 4, 3, the default of 3 is 3, right? As we know. So that's about 3. She didn't mention 2 and 1. She didn't mention splitting. If it was done in front of her, she would have mentioned it. And since she didn't mention, the default is 3 is 3. Right. So that's where the concept of praying 3 together comes from. What about the qunut before the witr? Ubay bin Ka'b radiallahu anhu narrates that Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam would recite the qunut in witr before the ruku', and that's narrated in Abu Dawud. So that's perhaps narrations that's supporting one method of performing salat witr. The other method that we mentioned, 2 and 1, is mentioned here as well. And Sahih Bukhari is narrated that Prophet Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said the night prayer is 2 by 2 and so on, meaning you can pray 2, 2, 2, 20, for example, 36, 40, whatever the case may be. If any one of you fears the arrival of the dawn, Fajr prayer, meaning, oh, the night prayer time is about to finish, then pray 1, right? So which shows what? 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. And then eventually at some point, 1 is added to the 2, right? So that's the whole concept. 2, and then added to that is 1. And then you have Anas radiallahu anhu, he said the Prophet Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam recited the qunut in the obligatory prayers for a month after the ruku', and that's the qunut nawazil, they call it. So since in the obligatory prayers it was done after ruku', those scholars say the same concept should be applied to the witr as well and should be done after the ruku'. Case in point, the idea is that both of these descriptions have their evidences, and there's a reason why scholars preferred one over the other. Inshallah, whatever the imam is doing, if you follow, there is no issue with that. If you have your personal preference throughout the year and you pray a certain way, that's perfectly fine as well.
So the one that should, if you were standing behind an imam, how can you tell which of the 2 methods the imam is going?
So in theory, it shouldn't make a difference, and I'll tell you why. Because if the imam sits for the second tashahhud, right,
Yeah.
and he does salam, then you just do salam. Even you might say, okay, what if I didn't read all the extras? All the extras is not mandatory I need to read. So if he just does salam, it's perfectly fine. Right. So let's just say hypothetically you're praying behind an imam and you're thinking he's gonna pray all 3 together.
Right.
Right. Let's just say. And he sits down in 2 and you just read at-tahiyyat
Right.
and he's taking longer than usual and he does salam and you just do salam, it's perfectly fine. Your salah is not invalid. It's not invalid. It's perfectly fine. So in theory, it shouldn't make too much of a difference. And if he gets up, then he gets up and you just follow him. right?
So there's no, so the making of the niyyah is.
Yeah, making the niyyah is the same. Making the niyyah is the same. You just intend that I'm praying, I'm doing witr. That's about it. Yeah.
Go back to two, good questions. One is, when you the attahiyat is the essential.
Yeah.
The durud.
Yeah, the dua and durud and stuff, these are all extra.
It's
Yeah,
extra.
it's sunnah, it's recommended.
Got it.
Yeah.
And the other thing was that the dua, there are two versions, right?
Dua qunut actually is many versions. Yeah, so you have Allahumma hdina fi man hadayt, you have Allahumma inna nasta'inuk, Allahumma inna na'udhu biridaka min sakhat. There's a lot actually. Even throughout the year, whichever way you pray, if you want to make your qunut longer, it's totally up to you. You can do whichever one you want, inshallah. Yeah. The last slide here is generally it is optimal to have the witr prayer as the last prayer performed at night, generally speaking. However, let's just say you prayed witr and you want to pray more later. It's permissible to do that. In fact, it's narrated in some instances that Prophet ﷺ did do it, perhaps to show that it's permissible. Right. So generally speaking, throughout the year, you want to perform all your prayers and then make witr the last one. But the situation may come up where you pray witr right now and you just couldn't sleep at night and you wake up and like, let me just pray. Right. You are allowed to perform more prayers. However, if you have a habit, you know for sure I'm going to wake up before Fajr because this is something I've been doing for the last 3 months and it's a habit of mine. So khalas, don't pray with it after Isha. Just wait until nighttime, go to sleep, wake up, perform some extra prayers and pray with it last. But if you don't have a habit, you're not sure I'm going to wake up or not wake up, just pray with it, go to sleep. And if you happen to wake up, then you can pray. There's no issue with that. Another case that comes up is in Ramadan. Sometimes witr is done in the early part and extra prayers are done later. You can perform witr with the imam and you can perform extra later as well. There's no issue with that, inshallah. But one thing to keep in mind, however, is person should not perform two witrs in one night. So you shouldn't perform one witr after Isha, then another witr before Fajr, because then your night prayers become even. You just did odd and odd, odd and odd becomes even, and that defeats the whole purpose. The idea is that your salah should be odd. And why? Because the Prophet ﷺ said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with it for a reason known best up to him. That's why our day prayers actually end up being odd, because you start with Fajr 2, Dhuhr 4, Asr 4, and you conclude the day at sunset with Maghrib as 3. So your day prayers end up being odd. So it should be the same way at nighttime where you perform your Isha as 4. Any extra prayers you pray in twos, and then you perform an odd 3 at the end, and you've just made it odd, right? But now if you double odd at nighttime, then you've defeated it, you made it into even. So that's something to be careful about. Right? Do not perform witr twice. If you prayed witr already, you can perform extra, no issue with that. And if you want to delay your witr, that's fine as well, inshallah. Yeah.
So one other question now. Some people are standing with the imam when the imam is saying the witr, and they say, "Oh no, I'm making the niyyah for this enough."
I don't get that.
So the imam is making the niyyah and doing the witr, and this friend of mine, she used to stand next to me and she used to say, "Oh, I'm not making a niyyah for the witr because I'm going to continue to pray when I go home. So these 2 rakats are going to be enough for me." And she would make a niyyah for now.
But the imam split, like the imam.
And the imam would either say 3 consecutively or he would.
But then she prayed all 3.
I have one more.
Is that?
Because you can't pray nafil in odd, unless there's something else more behind her thought process. I would have to.
Okay.
Generally speaking, nafil is not done in odd. Nafils are done in 2 and then witr in 3. Allahu unless there's something else behind what she was saying.
Make a different niyyah than what the imam is making the niyyah if you're following the imam.
So that's an area scholars differ. That's an area. Yeah. So you might see some people doing that. Yeah. Yeah. So depending on the situation. Yes.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
We come late for the Isha prayers.
Yeah. Isha.
The Tarawih starts.
Yeah.
Do you make the niyyah for the fathers?
Yeah.
For the two.
So this is kind of this was what I was thinking about. So the scholars differ on this issue or not. Some of the ulama, they say that no, you should pray Isha by yourself separately, and some of them they say you can join and just add 2 at the end. So I mean, inshallah, whatever is, I'll leave that up to you. Okay, inshallah. If there's space to, but they do say if there's multiple people for men, especially if there's multiple people that miss and you have space in the masjid somewhere, then you can do your own jama'ah elsewhere where you won't bother the jama'ah. I think we do have the capacity to do that. So you can avoid that difference of opinion altogether and just pray by yourself and just join, inshallah. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I think we are at Isha time exactly. So Jazakumullah khairan everyone, and inshallah may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to reach Ramadan. If there are any other questions that come up, I did put up a little flyer. I'll email it to you as well. You can reach out to me by email with any questions throughout the month, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum. What happened?